It turns out tree houses are much more in-depth than we thought. And by we, I mean me. Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Tree houses are without a doubt my favorite thing to build in this game. But building this specific treehouse right here got me to do a deep dive on the mechanics of tree houses. And it turns out there's actually a lot more to the mechanics of them than just building a blueprint. So I'm currently working on the next section of the treehouse compound, and I'm currently 128 days in. I actually learned a ton about some of the secret mechanics that they actually have. So I'm going to walk you through how they work, the different types of treehouses there are, and how you can build treehouses essentially however high you want. Alright, so the first thing to account for is that some trees actually do make better candidates for tree houses based on what you're going for. So the majority of the time when I would build tree houses, I would just choose a tree that I like the positioning of, but there's a little bit more to it than that, in that the ideal tree to build a tree house on is actually a tree like this. As you can see, the leaves don't actually branch out until the upper end of the tree. So if you don't want to have to worry about leaves clipping in the structure or anything like that, that's definitely the way to go. Not really a big deal, more just an aesthetics thing and a space thing, but nonetheless you can build a treehouse on basically whatever tree you want. This is a perfect example of that. But yeah, that's definitely the first thing you want to account for. Now the first types of tree houses are the prefabs, which you can see you have the tree platform right here, tree platform number 2, tree shelter number 1, and tree shelter number 2. Now usually when people want to go about building a custom tree house, they just use this tree platform because it costs the least amount of logs and it's essentially an empty canvas. So just go ahead and place that one right there. Thing is, there's actually a much better way to go about this, and that's actually by doing a tree shelter. I specifically recommend this one because it's less logs and you get a little bit of a head start for what the actual game plan is. Because the cool thing is you can actually deconstruct the tree house itself, and once you do that, you'll actually just be left with the platform, which is twice the size of that one. So if we build this one, you can see it's not that big, but nonetheless it is still pretty much an empty canvas. You can actually build up from this, which is usually what I like to do. But let's go ahead and build this one and I'll show you the comparison. The thing you'll notice is it's not taking all the logs of a specific type at the same time. It changes back and forth, and that's because there is a pattern to how it's built, in the sense that you can't actually like build a roof before you actually get the foundation down. And you can pretty easily see how this one's a lot bigger than that one. Thing is, this one has the structure already on it. But you can actually disassemble it, which is the biggest aspect of how I go about building my tree houses, because for this type of tree house, I always start with this structure. You start off with the roof. You can just throw those off. And you basically work your way from the top down. You will hurt yourself a little bit, so just be wary of that. And though you do have to cut down the logs to get this platform set up, you get to keep the logs after you disassemble it, so you can actually give yourself a head start later on. It does get pretty messy though, but you get the gist. You will get to the point where you can't take this one down just as is. That's because the first big shocker for me, whenever you're building a tree house, aside from the first log up, you're not actually building on the tree. It centers a log right here, which you can actually see clipping through. And that's actually what all the builds are connected to. So while down here you don't actually have one, and these supports are actually connected outwards, to build higher than this, it's all coming from the sensor. And so if you have like a thinner tree, you'll usually see it pretty easily. But you have to pop that one off first, and then you can get on with the rest of this assembly. And then here you are left with an empty canvas. You can build on this however you want. This is a much better option than that smaller one because you get a lot more space. And realistically, all you need to do is defend this trunk right here, and then your builds above should be pretty safe. An easy one to do is just the reinforced spikes. You only have a small area to cover, so as long as the cannibals don't actually get here, you're good to go. Now for this next bit, I definitely want to let you guys know that I have tried everything to recreate treehouse structures like this without having to use a blueprint. Frankly, it is not possible, and let me show you why. The reason that you actually can't recreate the structure is because they actually use these types of ghost supports that aren't actually there, but they register as being there. So if you actually take a half log and you bring it to the corner, it'll give you the option to use it as a support for the edge because it reads as a post being here. That's essentially how you build these structures. It's just it's not actually there. So when you think about it, it's actually pretty cool because you can essentially actually put these down. You can walk entirely underneath it, yet you will have extra support without actually having the risk of it being knocked off as easily because there's actually nothing making contact with the ground other than the tree itself. And you can take them off and everything, so it's not like it's going to permanently stay there, but it is definitely something to account for. But because of that, you can't recreate these structures. Because if you are trying to recreate this, the biggest thing is you cannot build anything to support this corner. You can actually build the center cross pretty easily, but the corners you actually can't build. Now this next way to build tree houses is probably going to be the most in-depth because you actually have to utilize that mechanic that I told you about where the center log is actually placed directly inside the tree. And now if you do this properly, you can actually build a tree house essentially as high as you want. I use this mechanic for this tree house. That's how it's actually 6 stories tall. But essentially what you're going to do, first find the tree that you actually... Essentially what you're going to do is first find the tree that you actually want to build on. You're going to place a log on that tree. You're then going to prop that log up, and this is actually where you're going to start from. You're then going to remove the top log, and you're going to see that the remaining log actually locks in 4 directions. You're going to aim it at the tree, and then from there, you're going to prop up the log inside the tree. So it's essentially the same structure, but now we have a log inside the tree that will allow us to build up. So you're going to grab some more logs. Of course, you're going to want to build ways to get up because that's definitely the biggest aspect to building tall and building tree houses. And believe it or not, I usually spend more time on the scaffolding itself than the tree houses that I'm actually building. And from here, it will be a little finicky, but you will get the option to place this log down just like that. And you essentially just keep repeating the process. And there you go. The thing that you do want to account for is to actually build the same structure, but just one forward and one back. So that way you can actually get a 1x3 or whatever the size you actually want to go for. Then just use the half logs as supports and you can remove all the scaffolding. Granted, you don't actually have to connect them until you're at the height that you want to be. And if you are building at a decline, you do occasionally come into this issue where it's actually leaning down and you can't get the same height. Easy fix for that. First, just gauge the difference in height. So it's about 1/4 log. So we're going to remove this and it'll actually give us the option to place it specifically where it needs to be. We're going to cut these down to size. Connect them, and then from there you can actually build up, and you can see it's exactly the height that we need. Another thing to help you out is that whenever you're actually building higher and you're having a harder time moving around, all you actually need to do is just place some scaffolding down. It can literally just be 2 planks, and from here you have a lot more variability in your motion. So if you're building high, this is definitely the easiest way to go about it. Now when you've actually reached the height that you want to go to, you can just connect everything together at the top, and you can basically see right there what we're going for. From there you can grab the half logs and actually use these as supports. Then you can go ahead and take these down. And this is basically the overall blueprint for the structure. So we'll go ahead and grab some planks to make the flooring. And if you're worried about getting up there, easy way to do it is a zipline gun, or you can always just place a rope down. This one's actually a pretty easy structure to build on, and it has a lot less bugs because it's essentially a completely custom foundation that's just using the mechanics of the treehouse blueprints. However, if you're like me and you'd rather have a disguised treehouse, there is a subtle fix for that. But you're essentially finding 2 trees that are about this far apart, or if you do want to go further, finding 2 trees that are this far apart. That is what I did here for my 6-story treehouse. The only downside to building structures higher up than this is that you actually can't place logs just directly on top of each other. So in this scenario right here, it works just fine because you're only placing 1 log and then it's actually connecting to the rest. But in my scenario where you're building a lot higher, every 2 logs need some sort of support between them because they can't stand on their own. But the good thing is you can use a single log and a half log to just build a strut right here, and that can keep you accounted for rather than having to build like an entire ladder structure. It is worth noting they are constantly changing this game, adding patches, removing game mechanics, or even adding other ones. So I'll be on the lookout if anything comes down the road to address this. And then the last type of treehouse is probably the one that you guys are the most familiar with, and that's basically just building a foundation up and then just building a structure at the top. If you do this amongst trees, it's basically a treehouse, kind of like how they do it on Treehouse Masters. And this is actually probably the easiest to build, and you can actually get trees like going through the walls, which does look pretty cool. I'm not really going to break this one down because I'm pretty sure you guys know how to build this one at this point. But I will say the one thing I always account for is going 1 block extra. So you can actually get the balcony pieces and you'll get a smaller profile of the structure itself. Now just a few extra tips. I don't really have Kelvin help me out when I'm building tree houses, specifically because I don't want him to cut down the trees in the area. So I always put him to get sticks and rocks. My suggestion is to build a few holders and have him fill them out while you're actually building, because you're not always going to need them, but whenever you do, it's much better to have a big collection than to not. Next thing, I would definitely suggest collecting as many logs as you can before you actually start building. Since these are custom structures, it does take a lot more time to get everything figured out. But if you do have a good collection of logs beforehand, it'll actually kind of cycle together, because once you actually get the foundation built, you can start removing logs from your scaffolding and get back to a healthy balance. But that's all the tips that I have for today. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you can get a little bit more perspective if you're going about wanting to do these builds yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.